I did not raise my voice when I asked the question. That is one of the few details I remember with perfect clarity. My hand was resting on the edge of the kitchen counter. The paper was slightly wrinkled where I had gripped it too hard without realizing. Across from me, my mother stood at the sink rinsing the same coffee mug long after it was already clean. My father was at the table, looking at a bill he was not really reading. I looked down at the document again, and then back up at them. Why is Emily's name on this account? Neither of them answered right away. The silence did not feel confused. That was the first thing that made my stomach tighten. If either of them had looked surprised, I might have told myself I was misunderstanding something. But my father did not look surprised. He looked tired. My mother kept rinsing the mug. "It is just paperwork," my father said finally. "It does not change anything." That sentence landed harder than if he had said something cruel. Because if it truly changed nothing, there would have been no reason not to tell me. I looked down at the statement again. The balance was 0. The debt that had sat over my parents' heads for years was finally gone. It should have been a relief. Instead, all I could see was Emily's name printed clearly at the top, where I had expected, without ever really admitting it to myself, to find mine. "That does not explain why I am not on it," I said. My mother turned off the water. She dried her hands slowly, like she needed the extra time. "We were going to talk to you about it, but you did not." My father leaned back in his chair and let out a quiet breath. "You were focusing on the wrong thing," he said. "The wrong thing." I remember staring at him for a second because the phrase revealed more than he meant it to. There was a right thing to focus on, apparently, and whatever that was, it did not include the fact that I had spent 3 years helping them get out from under that debt. It did not include me at all. "How long has it been like this?" I asked. My mother looked at my father. My father looked down at the table. "A while," he said. "A while." That word stayed with me later because it was vague in the exact way people are vague when the truth has edges sharp enough to cut someone. A while meant this was not recent. A while meant there had been time. Time in which everyone else knew what was happening. Time in which I had been the only one still acting as if I belonged inside the arrangement the way I thought I did. I set the paper down carefully on the counter. I did not say anything else. I stayed quiet because I could feel almost immediately that answers were not going to come from either of them in any useful form. Whatever had happened had already happened. Whatever decision had been made somewhere outside of me and before me. What I did not understand yet was how long I had been standing outside something I still thought I was part of. I have always been the one who stayed. That is the simplest way to explain my place in the family. I was the child who stayed close enough, long enough, for staying to become a role everyone else relied on. Emily had always been different. My younger sister lived 45 minutes away in a condo she liked to call temporary, even though she had been there almost 6 years. When she came over, she breezed in with coffee or pastries, kissed our mother's cheek, asked our father how he was doing, and settled into the kind of easy daughterhood that did not require very much from her. She stayed for dinner, offered opinions on things she did not have to deal with, then left before any actual responsibility had the chance to find her. The funny thing was, I had my own life too. Or I had been building one once. It just slowly bent around theirs in ways so small and steady that by the time I noticed, it no longer looked bent. It looked normal. 3 years earlier, my parents had started having trouble with money. At first, it was small enough to dismiss. A missed utility payment that turned into a late fee. A credit card balance that rolled over a little higher than it should have. A conversation cut short when I walked into the room. My father would mention that things were tighter than usual, My mother would say they were getting organized. Then the calls started. Sometimes I would hear the house phone ring and ring until my mother finally answered it with that falsely steady voice people use when they already know they are about to be asked for something they do not have. Once I came home from work and found her sitting at the table with a stack of envelopes spread out in front of her. She smiled when she saw me and gathered them into a pile before I could see the return addresses. "Nothing is wrong," she said. It was one of those family sentences that means the opposite of what it says. A few weeks after that, my father told me they had more debt than they had expected. "It is just a rough patch," he said. "We are getting ahead of it." "How bad is it?" I asked. He shrugged. "More than ideal, not impossible." That was enough for me to know it was bad. I started helping in the way people usually do when they love someone and do not yet understand how helping can become a structure all its own. I paid a bill one month because my father said he was waiting for something to clear. Then I covered a larger payment the next month because one of my mother's cards was close to maxed out. My parents resisted just enough to preserve the illusion that I was volunteering, then accepted with a gratitude that made refusal feel impossible. "You do not have to do this," my mother would say. "I know," I would answer. But after a while, it stopped being one bill or 1 month. It became a pattern. I picked up extra shifts at work. I stopped spending on things that were not necessary. When my friends suggested a weekend trip, I said, maybe next time. When my car started making a sound that probably should have been checked, I ignored it, because there was always something more urgent somewhere else. I told myself it was temporary. That is another sentence people can live inside for years. So I focused on what seemed concrete: numbers, payments, progress. Every month I could see the balance go down. Every month it felt like I was helping pull them back onto solid ground. No one ever promised me anything in return. Not once. Later, I would realize most of my assumptions had grown in the silence between what was said and what was allowed to continue. No one said, "This is your responsibility now." No one said, "This is shared." No one said, "You will have a voice in what comes after." But no one said the opposite either. And when you give enough to something over a long enough period of time, your mind begins to build shape around that effort. You start to believe your role means something beyond usefulness. You assume, without saying it aloud, that your investment has created some kind of standing. I thought that was what had happened here. There had been signs before the account statement. Conversations had a way of pausing when I entered the kitchen. Not every time, just often enough that I noticed, then felt embarrassed for noticing. My father started using the phrase, "We will figure it out later," whenever I asked anything that touched the future. Should they refinance? Should they think about selling the house eventually? Later, he would say. My mother once asked me out of nowhere if I saw myself living there long term. We were folding laundry in the den. She asked it lightly, almost like she was making conversation. I laughed a little. "I mean, I am here, aren't I?" She smiled, but the smile looked thin. "I am just thinking ahead," she said. At the time, I took it as concern. Now I hear it differently. Emily had come by on a Saturday afternoon and asked my father whether he had ever thought about what the place might sell for in the current market. I remember looking at her because the question annoyed me. "Why are you talking about resale value?" I asked. She shrugged. "Everything has value," she said. I was sitting in my car outside the bank, holding my phone and staring at the confirmation screen. The balance had finally hit 0. After years of watching the numbers shrink in uneven increments, it was gone. It felt quieter than triumph, more like relief settling into my body after being held somewhere tight for a very long time. My father thanked me after dinner. My mother touched my shoulder on her way past and said she did not know what they would have done without me. At the time, I let those words land as gratitude. Now, looking back, I hear something else inside them. Relief that the role I had filled so consistently was still intact. Relief that I had not yet asked what came after. When I stood in the kitchen and saw Emily's name on the account, all of those moments rearranged themselves in my mind with disturbing speed. Not enough to form a full answer, but enough to make the room feel unfamiliar. "How long did you say?" I asked again. My father rubbed the bridge of his nose. "A few months." "That is not the same as a while." He said nothing. My mother crossed her arms, not defensively exactly, but in that closed way she had whenever she wanted a conversation to shrink. "We did what made sense," she said. "For who?" I asked. Her face changed then, only slightly, just enough. "For the family," she said. But all I could hear underneath it was the truth they were avoiding. A decision had been made. It involved something I had spent years helping sustain, and somehow my role in that decision had been reduced to silence. I went to bed late that night and slept badly, not because I was furious yet. What I felt instead was a slow, spreading unease that kept turning over the same questions without settling on any of them. Why had they done it this way? Why Emily? Why not tell me? Why talk as if my noticing were the problem? Around 2 a.m, I got up and walked into the living room. The house was quiet in the way a familiar place becomes strange when everyone else is asleep. I sat on the couch and looked around at all the small repairs and replacements I had handled over the years. The lamp by the chair that I had rewired, the patch in the hallway where I had fixed the drywall after a leak, the shelf in the laundry room I had installed because my mother said she needed more storage. Pieces of time were everywhere in that house. By the time I finally went back to bed, one thing had become clear. The account statement had not revealed a misunderstanding. It had revealed a structure, and I had no idea yet how long everyone else had already been living inside it. The next morning, everything looked exactly the same. That was the part that unsettled me the most. My mother stood by the stove making breakfast. My father sat at the table reading the news on his phone. The same sounds filled the kitchen, the same movements, the same rhythm that had been there for years. If someone had walked in from the outside, nothing would have seemed different. But I could feel it. Not in anything visible, in what was missing. No one mentioned the account. No one mentioned the conversation from the night before. It was as if it had already been filed away as something finished. That should have calmed me down. Instead, it made everything worse. I poured myself coffee and sat down across from my father. "We need to talk about yesterday," I said. He did not look up immediately. "We already did," he said. "No," I replied. "You told me it was paperwork. That is not the same thing." My mother turned slightly, her attention shifting toward us without fully stopping what she was doing. "We did not want to make a big deal out of it," she said. "It is a big deal. It does not have to be." There it was again, that pattern. The size of the situation depended on how I reacted, not on what had actually happened. I set my cup down carefully. "When did it happen?" I asked. My father finally put his phone down. "A few months ago." "How many?" He hesitated just long enough to matter. 5. 5 months. The number landed differently this time. Not vague like a while. Specific. Measurable. 5 months of me still paying into something that had already been changed. 5 months of conversations that now felt incomplete. 5 months of being included just enough to keep everything running. "Why did you not tell me then?" I asked. My father leaned back in his chair. "It was not the right time." "For what?" "For all of this," he said, gesturing lightly between us, like the conversation itself was the problem. I nodded once. "So instead, you just did not tell me at all?" "That is not what we did," my mother said quickly. "We were going to." "You keep saying that," I replied, "but you did not." Silence followed, not tense, just closed. That was when something in me shifted more clearly. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not something they were still figuring out. This was something that had already been decided, and I had not been part of it. Later that afternoon, I found myself in my room going through old bank statements. I did not plan to do it. I just opened one file, then another, scrolled back month by month. Payments, transfers, amounts that looked small on their own but added up over time. There was no single dramatic moment, no one payment that stood out, just consistency. Proof that I had been there, that I had been involved, that I had been carrying a portion of something I believed was shared. I was not keeping score, at least not in the way people usually mean, but seeing it laid out like that made something harder to ignore. I had not just helped, I had committed, and I had done it with an understanding that no one had actually confirmed. That should have made me angry, but it did not. Not yet. What I felt instead was clarity starting to take shape. Not complete, but enough to recognize that something fundamental had shifted. That evening, Emily came by. She did not usually come on weekdays. That alone was enough to make me notice. She walked in like everything was normal, said hello, set her bag down, went straight into the kitchen. I waited a moment before following. They were already talking. Not loudly, just enough. The conversation stopped when I entered. Not abruptly, just enough to be obvious. "What is going on?" I asked. "Nothing," Emily said. "Just catching up." I looked at her for a second. "We should all be clear about something." My father sighed quietly. "About what?" "The account." Emily let out a small breath. "It has already been handled," she said. Handled. That word again. Like the outcome was the only thing that mattered. "Handled for who?" I asked. "For the family. That includes me." She nodded. "Of course it does." But the way she said it did not match the words. "You were part of this decision," I asked. She shrugged. "They asked me to help manage things." Manage. Another word that sounded reasonable until you looked at what it replaced. And putting it in your name was part of that. "It made things simpler," she said. "For who?" "For everyone, not for me." She tilted her head slightly. "You are making this more complicated than it needs to be." There it was again. Different voice, same structure, same implication. You are the problem for noticing. I looked at my parents. Neither of them corrected her. That was the moment something inside me stopped trying to interpret things in the most generous way possible. Not completely, but enough. Enough to see the pattern without explaining it away. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I just left the room. Not abruptly, not dramatically, just quietly. And for the first time, it did not feel like avoidance. It felt like direction. A few days later, I met my friend Jason after work. We sat at a small table near the window of a coffee shop we had been going to for years. I had not planned to tell him everything, but once I started, it came out clearly. Not emotional, just factual. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back slightly. "Let me get this straight," he said. You paid off their debt. Yes. And they transferred everything into your sister's name without telling you. Yes. He took a sip of his coffee, then said something simple. Then you need to stop acting like this is still your situation. That landed harder than I expected. I am not acting like that. He gave me a look. You kind of are. I did not respond, because part of me already knew he was right. You are still operating like you have a say, he continued. Like your contribution gives you standing. I looked down at the table. But it does not. Silence sat between us for a moment. Then he added, They already decided what this is. That was the part I had not fully said out loud yet, not even to myself. On the drive home, his words stayed with me. They already decided what this is. Inside the house, everything still looked the same, but now I could see the structure underneath it more clearly. I was not part of a shared system. I was part of a useful one, and those are not the same thing. The shift became practical a few days later. A bill came in. My mother left it on the counter with a note. Same as always, can you take care of this one? I stood there looking at it longer than necessary. There was nothing unusual about it. Same handwriting, same tone, same expectation. But it looked different now. Not because it had changed, because I had. I picked it up, turned it over, then set it back down. That night at dinner, I asked, why am I still paying for things here? Both of my parents looked at me. My mother spoke first, because things are tight this month. That is not what I asked. My father set his fork down. What are you trying to say? I am trying to understand why I am expected to keep covering expenses for something I have no say in. My mother's expression shifted. You live here too? That almost worked, because it sounded reasonable, because it fit the old structure. I live here, I said, but I am not part of the decisions that matter. My father's tone hardened slightly. Not every decision needs to involve you. No, I said, just the one where everything changed. Silence followed. Not closed like before. Unsettled. Different. That was when it became clear. Not emotionally. Logically. They expected me to continue in the same role, to keep contributing, to keep adjusting, to keep making things easier. And something in me had already started to refuse that. Later that night, Emily texted me, You are making this harder than it needs to be. I read the message twice, then set my phone down. Because for the first time, I understood something completely. They had built this entire situation on one assumption, that I would keep adjusting, that I would stay, that I would continue to be useful. And what none of them seemed to understand yet was that something in me had already stopped. The next morning, the bill was still on the counter. I saw it, walked past it, poured my coffee, and left it exactly where it was. No explanation, no announcement, just a decision. For most of the day, nothing happened. The house moved through its usual rhythm. My father left for work, my mother cleaned. Time passed. But by evening, the silence around the bill had changed. We need to take care of that, my mother said, nodding toward the counter. I saw it, I replied. She waited. I did not move. Are you going to handle it? She asked. No. The word came out clean. For a moment, she did not react. What do you mean, no? I mean, I am not paying for it. The room shifted. Not dramatically, but enough. That was the moment something moved from understanding into action. For the first day after that, nothing happened. That did not surprise me. Patterns do not break all at once. They stretch first. They adjust. They test whether everything will quietly return to what it was before. The bills stayed on the counter. My father left for work without mentioning it. My mother moved through the house like she always did, cleaning, organizing, keeping everything in motion. If she noticed that I had not paid it, she did not say anything. Not yet. By the second day, something shifted. Not loudly, not directly, just enough to feel it. "You saw the bill, right?" my mother asked that evening. Her voice sounded casual, but it was not. "I saw it," I said. She waited. I did not move. After a few seconds, she asked, "Are you going to take care of it?" "No." The word came out without hesitation. For a moment, she looked at me like she had not heard it correctly. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean I am not paying for it." My father looked up from the table. His expression changed slightly. Not anger, not yet. Something closer to disbelief. "That is not how this works," he said. I nodded. "I know." That seemed to unsettle him more than if I had argued. "You live here," he continued. "You use everything here. You do not just decide you are not contributing." "I have been contributing," I said, "more than anyone else for a long time." "That is not the point." "Then what is the point?" He did not answer right away, because there was no simple answer, not one they could say out loud without changing something else. My mother stepped in, her voice softer. "You are upset. We understand that, but this is not the way to handle it." I shook my head slightly. This is exactly the way to handle it. That was the first time I said something without trying to make it easier for them, without trying to soften it. I just said it. And the room shifted. Not dramatically, but enough. That night, no one brought it up again. The bill stayed where it was. The next morning, it was still there. By the third day, it was gone. My father had paid it. He did not mention it, but I saw the receipt on the counter. His handwriting on the check stub. A small detail, but it changed something. Not just in the house, in how they saw me. That should have felt like a win, but it did not. It felt like confirmation. Over the next few days, things adjusted. Quietly. My mother stopped leaving notes for me, stopped asking directly. Instead, she handled things herself, or my father did. Emily's name started coming up more often, not casually, with weight. Emily said we should look into that. Emily thinks it makes more sense this way. It was subtle, but clear. She had moved into a position no one had formally announced, and now it did not need to be hidden anymore. That was when something else became clear. I was not stepping away from something new. I was stepping out of something that had already moved on without me. That realization did not come with anger. It came with distance. The following weekend, I started looking at apartments. I did not tell anyone. Not because I was hiding it, because I was not ready to explain something I was still understanding myself. There was no moment where I said, "I am leaving." It was quieter than that. More like staying no longer made sense. The first place I looked at was small. 1 bedroom, 3rd floor. The kind of place you would not notice unless you were specifically looking for it. The landlord walked me through quickly, pointed out storage space, mentioned recent repairs. I nodded, but I was not really listening. What I noticed instead was the quiet. Not the absence of sound, the absence of expectation. There was no history there, no roles, no unspoken agreements waiting for me. Just space. I stood in the middle of the living room after he finished talking, trying to imagine what it would feel like to live there. Not as someone who was needed, not as someone who was expected, just someone who chose to be there. That should have felt strange, but it did not. That night at dinner, my mother asked me a simple question. "Are you going to be home next weekend?" I paused for a moment. "I have a few things to take care of," I said. She hesitated. "What kind of things?" I looked at her. "I am looking at apartments." The reaction was not immediate. My father stopped mid-motion. My mother set her glass down slowly. "For what?" she asked. "To move." The words stayed in the air. "You do not need to do that," she said quickly. "You are upset right now. You do not have to make a big decision because of this." "I am not making it because I am upset," I said. "I am making it because things are clear." My father frowned. "Clear about what?" "About how this works." "That is not fair," my mother said. I almost smiled, not because it was funny, because fairness had not been part of any of their decisions. "I am not trying to make it fair," I said. "I am trying to make it accurate." Something settled in that moment, not emotionally, structurally. A few days later, Emily came by again. This time, she did not pretend it was casual. "I heard you are moving out," she said. "I am looking," I replied. She nodded. "You do not have to do that." I did not answer right away. She shifted slightly. "You are making this bigger than it needs to be." The same sentence again. Different day, same meaning. I looked at her. "It was already big," I said. "I just did not see it clearly before." She frowned. "Mom and Dad did not mean anything by it." "I know." That seemed to catch her off guard. "You do?" "Yes." I leaned back slightly. "They meant to make a decision that worked for them." I paused. "They meant to avoid a conversation they did not want to have." Another pause. "They meant to keep things comfortable for as long as possible." She opened her mouth, then stopped, because there was nothing to correct. I was not arguing. I was not accusing. I was just stating it, and for the first time, she did not have a response. "I am not trying to change what you meant," I said. "I am just changing what I do with it." That was the moment everything shifted, not loudly, but clearly. The following week, I signed the lease. No hesitation, no second thoughts, just a decision that felt right. Moving out did not happen all at once. It happened in pieces, boxes, small trips, sorting through things I had not thought about in years. My mother hovered at first, asking if I needed help, offering to pack things that were already packed. My father stayed quieter, watching more than speaking. Emily did not come by. On the last day, I carried the final box out to my car, then stood there for a moment longer than necessary. The house looked the same. Nothing about it suggested how much had changed. I walked back inside one last time, just to check, make sure I had not forgotten anything. My mother was in the kitchen. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. Her voice sounded different, not trying to convince me, just smaller. "I am." She nodded slowly. "You can always come back." I looked at her for a moment. I understood what she meant, not as an offer, as a hope, that the version of me they were used to might still exist somewhere, waiting. "I know," I said, but I also knew I would not. My father met me at the door. He hesitated, then said, "Take care of yourself." "You too." That was it. No resolution, no explanation, no moment where everything was made clear. Just an ending that did not feel like an ending. And for the first time, that did not bother me. The first night in the apartment was quiet. Not the kind of quiet I was used to. There was no television in the background, no footsteps in the hallway, No low conversations drifting from one room to another. Just stillness. I sat on the floor with a takeout container and looked around. Half unpacked boxes, a chair pushed against the wall, a space that did not ask anything from me. That was the part that felt the most unfamiliar. For years, I had lived inside a system that always needed something. A bill, a repair, a decision. Something that required me to step in and adjust. And I had done it without thinking too much about it. Because it felt normal. Because it felt necessary. Because it felt like it meant something. Now, sitting there in that empty apartment, I realized something simple. It had only meant something because I believed it did. The next few days passed slowly. Not in a heavy way, in a quiet one. I unpacked a little at a time, not because I had to, because I could. There was no urgency, no pressure, no one waiting for something to be done. I placed things where I wanted them, moved them again if it did not feel right, took my time. That was new. Choice without expectation. My parents called a few times. The conversations were short. How are you settling in? Did you find everything you needed? They did not mention the account. They did not mention the house. They stayed on the surface. Careful, controlled, like we were all moving around something none of us were going to name directly. I answered, calm, polite, but different. There was a distance now. Not forced, not intentional, just there. And for the first time, that distance did not feel like conflict. It felt like clarity. Emily texted once, then again a few days later. Nothing about what happened, just normal messages. Checking in, asking how the new place was. Like we could continue where things left off without acknowledging where they had actually gone. I responded, short, respectful, but not the way I used to. There was no effort to smooth anything over, no attempt to return to something that no longer existed, just acknowledgement. That should have felt uncomfortable, but it did not. It felt accurate. About a month later, I drove past the house. I had not planned to. The road I was on simply led that way. For a moment, I thought about turning down the street, slowing down, looking at it, seeing if it felt different. Then I did not. I kept driving. Not because I was avoiding it, because I did not need to go back to understand what it was anymore. For a long time, I had treated that place like something I was building toward, something that would eventually reflect the time and effort I had put into it, something that would, at some point, become mine in a way that mattered. Now I saw it clearly. It was just a house, not a promise, not a future, not something waiting for me, just a place that belonged to someone else. And that realization did not feel sharp anymore. It felt steady. There is a difference between losing something and realizing it was never yours. That difference matters, because one feels like something was taken from you. The other feels like something finally became clear. I thought about the account again, the way Emily's name had been printed at the top. The way mine had not been there at all. At the time, that felt like the moment everything changed. Now I understood something else. It was not when things changed. It was when I saw them as they already were. Over the next few weeks, small things continued to shift, not in obvious ways, in quieter ones. My parents stopped asking for help, not just with money, with anything. No calls about repairs, no questions about bills, no casual requests that assumed I would step in. At first, I noticed it. Then, gradually, I stopped expecting it. That was the real change, not the distance itself, the absence of expectation. One afternoon, my mother called. Her voice sounded softer than usual. "I was thinking," she said, "maybe you could come by this weekend." I paused, not because I did not know what to say, because I wanted to answer honestly. "I do not think that is a good idea right now," I said. There was a brief silence. Then she said, "Okay." No argument, no pressure, no attempt to convince me. Just acceptance. That stayed with me longer than I expected. Not because of what was said, because of what was not. There was no effort to pull me back into the old structure, no attempt to return things to how they were. And for the first time, I realized something important. They were adjusting too. Not in a way that changed what had happened, not in a way that fixed anything, but in a way that acknowledged, even quietly, that something had shifted. And so had I. I stopped checking in the same way, stopped feeling responsible for things that were no longer mine to carry, stopped translating discomfort into action, stopped making things easier at my own expense. Not all at once, but steadily. There was no big moment, no final conversation, no clear line where everything changed, just a series of small decisions that added up to something different, something more accurate. One evening, I sat in my apartment and thought about the past few years. Not emotionally, just clearly. The time, the effort, the way I had shaped my life around something I believed in. For a moment, I expected to feel regret, but I did not. Because none of that time had been wasted. It had taught me something, not about them, about me. It taught me how easily roles become expectations, how quickly effort can be taken for granted when it is consistent enough, how silence can replace agreement if no one questions it, and how long someone can stay in a place that no longer fits them simply because it once did. That understanding did not feel heavy. It felt useful. I did not need an apology. I did not need a different explanation. I did not need the situation to resolve in a way that felt fair, because I was no longer standing inside it, and that was enough. Nothing dramatic marked the end of it. There was no final argument, no moment where everything came together. Just distance, just clarity, just a quiet understanding of what had always been there. I did not lose anything when I left. I just stopped pretending it was mine. They kept the house. I kept myself.